Hey folks, welcome everybody. Today is a special day. For me, this specific video is actually one of my strongest content up to date. I believe this may be something that I've been working on for a while, and I would love to share with everybody. This is actually creating my own opening. I invented a new opening and I looked over the chess database to make sure this has never been played. And I checked on this, I basically checked the moves and the lines with Chess Engine to justify the opening. And I created a name. And I spent some time on the name specifically because you cannot really change names in the future, so you stuck with what you have. And I had to spend some time on it, and I basically wanted to have a name of an opening that has a meaning. I actually dedicate this opening to my mom that's helping me support the channel and YouTube and my Twitch. And hopefully you guys will be able to support this opening as well. I personally would be playing this opening everywhere, even classical chess. The opening is actually sound and it's playable, and I'm actually gonna start posting some YouTube videos and other content about this opening, playing certain lines, what kind of results I'm getting. I actually been practicing with the chess engines specifically, and I've been looking over lines. You do need to have some training, but I will be doing this with people so you could see what kind of lines I'm looking for. This is an interesting opening to play. The opening is only with white pieces, so this is not a system per se opening. I would say this has more lines into it. This, I would say, Siri that I created, backed with a computer. I would say Siri, but obviously there's more lines into it. It's easy to play. I created my own ideas into this opening, and I feel it's sound, it's playable. And the whole goal is actually you needed to make sure that this opening has never been played. There's a lot of openings that has been played, so obviously I had to make sure this opening specifically is not in the database. According to my search, I have not seen it, and I would be playing this opening specifically over the board. If I ever go back to over the board tournaments, I would be playing it non-stop, not just over in blitz games. It's going to be more like classical games that I'll be playing it. I'm going to promote this opening really effectively, and we'll see how this one plays out. I represent you today, folks. The openings that I've been invented, it's called the maneuver. I spent a lot of time on this name. What kind of name? Because you cannot really change names. You're stuck with what you have. I needed a name that has actually a meaning to it, not just like a random name. I needed like that it has a meaning toward the opening. There's some maneuvering is gonna happen about this opening. So the maneuver actually start with this one. This may feel like, okay, you're playing knight a3. This is a sodium attack. It is a sodium attack if we follow up with, let's say, e5, knight c4. This becomes, the sodium attack. I think if d5, you play c4. There's not many lines into the sodium attack, and many people would not play this, assuming that, this is a knight in the corner, you're breaking all the principle. You just need to justify why you're playing this and how effectively you could play this as an opening. I could tell you the maneuver right off the start here is actually the knight is going to go here, eventually going to c2, knight e1, knight e3. The whole concept is this knight goes to d3. If you leave this knight on a3 for the longest time, this opening is pretty much garbage at this point. The idea is basically to get this knight activated, and you're also playing an opening that people may not be expecting what to do. I would say if you're playing the black side, people play centralized chess, and I was basically prepared for this with the chess engines, this kind of lines that I'm going to show you guys, and let's start. I created a main line and I looked over the database, so hopefully I have not seen this happening before. There are similar lines, but not the same, and we start with one a3, folks. Now, typically, When you play knight e3 first move, what do you play? I mean, black plays centralized chess. The sodium attack is c4, folks. So if you end up playing c4, this is no longer the maneuver. The maneuver opening relies heavily on knight e3, d5, and what's coming next, which is actually d4. This no longer becomes the sodium attack. As a matter of fact, you could still go to the sodium attack if you end up playing c4. This is not what we're going to do here. We're going to play entirely different setup here. So d4 is what you should be doing. The reason d4 is actually a good move here is basically you don't want, like black having the center. You're countering the center fast enough. So you're disallowing him to play, let's say, e5. You just simply take. If you end up playing like any kind of move, you give up the center, then black is already doing well. So the whole idea of d4 is pretty much controlling the center. You're fighting in the center, pretty much. So knight f6. Knight f3 is actually the key move in this position. This bishop f4 that I looked at, that I was leaning toward, you play like some kind of Jivava London perhaps, something similar to it. His exception is knight on e3, not c3. Some kind of a London, I guess. But I went against this. I feel like knight f3 is a key move because bishop f4, if you play bishop f4, there's some weird lines that you walked into knight h5. It's actually playable, but I feel like knight f3 is a really key factor here. And the point of knight f3 is actually you do play g3, bishop g2. That's actually the idea of the maneuver. And knight on e3 has to be moved to d3. If you don't get to play knight d3, then the whole thing really doesn't make any sense. So knight f3 here, bishop f5. This is actually more like this is a setup that black could play. It's more like the London system perhaps for black side. So g3 is what you should be doing. You're looking at bishop g2. Now this is actually interesting, and I call this the main line. There's a reason why I call this the main line. If you end up playing bishop g2, I think knight b4, according to the database, is actually there's plenty of games with knight b4. I'm not sure if this actually goes to the sodium attack. It may, and there's no need for that. We're not playing the sodium attack. And the idea here, the next move is c3. This is actually the main move for me. And I had to double check this with the computer pretty much to make sure that works. Otherwise, there's no point. The idea is knight c2, you're preparing knight c2, knight e1. You're also stopping knight b4. So here, black could play h6 or e6. E6 is more common just to get the bishop out. Knight c2, so you have to be careful here with this move. If you play bishop g2, bishop takes e3, according to the engine, this actually be good for black. Most of the lines in the maneuver, I do allow this, like bishop takes e3, and then you take, and then you have the bishop pair. So believe it or not, this is something that I'm allowing. It's part of my ideas that I have is bishop takes e3 is something that I'm allowing, but not in a situation like this. If you play bishop g2, bishop takes, and I think knight e4 is pretty good for black. We don't want to do this. This is the reason why this is the main line and you had to play knight c2. This is something that you have to remember pretty much if you end up playing this. So h6 is actually more, this feels like, like a London system for black side. So here, bishop g2. And this is actually, the idea is pretty much, now is pretty much feels like it's an equal position. Bishop e7, castles, and the idea is knight e1. This is exactly what we're trying to do. So what the point of knight e1 is actually knight d3. This is the maneuver, folks. The maneuver, actually, the knight goes to e3, knight c2, knight e1, knight d3. That's actually the point of the maneuver. And we are able to achieve this. So this actually stopped. I stopped here. So the idea is pretty simple. You play knight d3, and this actually looks fairly equal. There's no problem here. This is fairly playable. I believe this is something that I could actually play all the time. I don't feel like there's any disadvantage. So knight d3 and controlling e5 seems to be interesting. You could also play bishop f4, bishop d2. This, it's not really anything to worry about here. So this is actually the first game. There's another one that I created. It's a main line. It's very similar to this one, to be exactly fair here. Let's see. I'm just looking over it because I saved this in a different area. Let's see, this is a one? Yeah, so here it's the same idea, main line. I'm just quickly going over the move. You have to remember c3 is the move, e6, bishop g2, knight c2. Now bishop e7 instead of bishop d6. I mean, this is same idea white is gonna play. Knight e1. It's the same idea, same plan. So it's very easy, very easy to play here. So this is actually marked. I marked this as a main line. There are maybe more, more moves to be played in this line, but I feel like this is pretty much playable for white. I'm pretty excited about this one to see how well this works with tighter players. So this ends the main line or this specific structure here in this opening. So now we're getting to more interesting lines. Let's see. Let me see here. So, I also have the names of the variation that I created. Pretty much, I named the variation. You guys could see this. So this is actually the main line. There's no specific name except the maneuver opening. And I named a different variation. We're gonna start with this one. Let me see, do I have it here? All right, I guess I do. Here we go. So, knight e3, d5, d4, knight f6, knight f3. Now, this one, so I call this a Fianchetto advanced variation. Let me put it this way. Advanced Fianchetto variation. I'm gonna have the names in the video details so you guys could check this for yourself. So this actually, the idea is bishop g7, and actually this is the same idea that white is gonna do. Bishop g2, you castle c6, c3, knight d7. This feels like it's a structure that black could play. And then the interesting part here, rook e8 is interesting, and you have to be careful with this move. If you, let's say you play like bishop b2, e5 is actually kind of interesting for black. So this actually, the advanced idea that I have is bishop f4 is basically stopping e5. And this actually may transpose to different lines, meaning that there's another line that I have is knight h4, bishop e3 maybe also is playable here. So the idea here is we're gonna play knight d3, knight e1, knight d3 anyway, and we're also stepping e5. This actually feels like it's equal to me. I mean, black may be slightly better, but obviously this is a playable game as far as I'm concerned. So this actually is a Fianchetto advanced variation, and I call it the advanced variation because this may be an attempt by black to try to break on e5, which now this is the reason why bishop f4 is played. So this we take care of this so far. So I mean, it's easy to learn. It's interesting. Nothing, it's not like it's -4 or anything. it's playable in every line. It's so far. So we're gonna go march into different lines. Let me see. So this is actually the advanced, the one I'm gonna show you guys. This is actually the advanced, advanced variation. Let me see if that's the one. This is not the one. I think that's the one. Okay, so it's very similar to this one, and I called it the advanced variation specifically. It's similar to this one, except there's no bishop g7. I'm gonna show it to you guys here. So knight e3, d5, d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, g3, c6. So this is wait, this is actually what I showed. It's similar to g7, I think. Bishop d6 and bishop f4. So this is another attempt by black is to play e5. This is bishop f4 is an idea that I created, so we kind of stop. Now, there's something that people could ask about. Why not just bishop takes a3? This is actually an interesting idea about the maneuver is actually allowing this to happen. And so this may be interesting. You have the two bishop pair. This is actually interesting. I mean, I feel like this may double pawn. People may feel like, why are you doubling up the pawn? This is like more like I would say positional exchange, which you may have double pawn, but I believe this is extremely playable for white. As a matter of fact, I want him to take and you take back. You may control rook b1, you may have some ideas with the bishop pair. So this is actually extremely playable. It's not like, well, you know, you double up your pawn and it should be good for black. It's not. It's more like equal at this point if you were to take on a3. I mean, I checked this was an engine. It's interesting in so many levels here. So bishop f4 is where it stopped. I mean, now you could take, and now if you take on f4, you pretty much, this actually feels like it's equal according to computers or engines here. You just take, you do take a control over e5, and believe it or not, c3, knight c2, knight e1 could still be played. You don't want to leave this knight on a3 for the longest time. So if people play this maneuver opening, you don't leave the knight on a3. I mean, that defeats the purpose of, you know, I mean, you need to play knight c2, knight e1, knight d3. The idea of knight d3, the knight gets active. It gets to more square, effective square than knight a3. And this actually, the ultimate goal is actually to get to knight d3. So this actually the advanced variation, the maneuver advanced variation. So we're doing so well here. I mean, according to the engine here, this feels like it's equal to me. And I actually checked different engines to clarify this for myself. So we're gonna do other lines, folks. Let me see. All right, I'm just trying now. The serious lines now, I believe this is a serious line. So this actually takes care of, we talked about knight e3 and d5. So this pretty much takes care of d5 as a whole. There are maybe some sidelines. I mean, you could play knight e3, knight e6, but I don't think this is a way to play against, you know, I kind of ignore all these kind of ideas because this actually leads to white being okay, if pretty much equal right off the bat, without any kind of challenging on the center. So then the next set here is interesting. 93, let me see, this is not the one. This is the one actually, hold on. This is gonna be the one. All right, so here, this becomes interesting. And I had to double check this for a long time to make sure this is actually playable, and it is extremely playable. So now, e5. Now it's another way, and actually this is becoming interesting, right? d4 has been played in the database, but not exactly the same setup that I created here. Again, bishop take d3 is tempting, right? We are allowing this. Like, we're really allowing bishop takes e3 and pawn takes. I would actually play this for white. Like, I would be happy with black takes a3 at this point. So d4 has been played in database, but not exactly. Actually, e4. Hold on, folks. This is something that we're gonna talk about e4, but not now. Yeah. So this is the e4 is actually another. It's a way of playing this. We're gonna start with another one first. Let me see. All right, we just do this. All right, I have this saved on my collection here. So e5, d4. I think taking it is actually the most precise here. There's actually two really moves here. You don't want to. There's no other move. I don't think knight c6 is even a good move here. I mean, this may equalize completely in move two. Here is actually the more precise. So here you do have to take. I looked with knight f3 with the computer. I mean, queen takes d4. In my own opinion, is actually by far the most effective. And this actually may be questionable. Like you taking here, you allowing a knight c6. Yeah, we are. I actually called this specific line or specific variation. I believe this is actually the stellar variation. It's after my username. It could be a stellar way of playing it, right? Knight c6, queen e4. The idea, so according to the database, queen e3 has been played. Did not see queen e4. So queen e4 marks my way of playing this. Carry on with the maneuver. So bishop e7, bishop g5 is actually the idea. It comes down here. You pretty much bishop g5 is pretty much allowing you want to trade and you open up for castling along. And h6 is one way to play this. You may feel like, okay, so bishop g5 is you know, it's kind of a waste of move, but it's not. You just simply takes. Knight f3. You do have to play knight f3, and after knight f3 here, I mean, it feels like here it's pretty much equal. This is extremely playable position. You could actually castle long in this line, and it becomes interesting. And I do like this to play for white, to be honest. I feel like this is maybe interesting position to play over the board, even in blitz game. It's easy to play, I believe. It may be more like equal to me at this point. So this is actually one way to play this. There's another lines, possibilities. Let me see. There's another line here. Okay, wait, this is not the one. That's close. We do analyze. All right. Knight 3 e5, d4 stakes here. So queen e4, this d5. So this may feel like, well, you wasted time on e4. We simply take at this point, justifying bishop g5, and we take here. This actually feels interesting. Knight takes is, I would believe, it's best. Queen f4. And here, I believe the line ends here, and I feel like this is still interesting way to play this position. There's knight g6, I think, queen g3, according to engines, and this, I mean, white would likely to castle long. And this is actually interesting to play. In my own opinion, this is actually a very interesting position. Remember, the knight in e3 is not sitting for a while here. There's also some tricks, maybe knight b5 in this line, attacking on c7. Maybe black could just simply play a6. You do have to remember that the knight has to go to c2. So maybe you could still play like c3 and knight in c2. Eventually open up for knight d4. This is actually very playable. I mean, it's not like, black has an advantage. This feels like this is something to be played. So there are more lines into it here. The next one is actually interesting, and I believe this is actually, I would love to say it's novelty. Let's see. It makes this line interesting. So it's the same takes here. Now, knight here is playable, and instead of, so knight f3, d5. Now, what's interesting, according to the engine, and I think the next move is actually interesting here. Do you play queen f4? What do you exactly do here? The idea is actually queen a4, which is, it's something that I spent some time on. The reason queen a4 is actually a line that you could play here. There's some tricks. I think knight b5, according to the engine, knight b5, knight d4, or knight b5, bishop f4, which makes this really exciting to play. I mean, let's say if black is not careful, he's really looking at c7 being a problem here. As a matter of fact, the engine likes a6, which actually, it does make me feel that this is actually very strong, queen e4. You could play bishop f5, also there are some lines, then you end up playing c3. So this is actually still very active line to play. There's also knight e5, and in some lines that you could deploy this, and you could use it. So this actually ends the stellar variation in the maneuver. So if this were to happen, you just take, you prepare yourself. There might be other lines, but I think the other lines are not as challenging as this one. Let me see, there might be one more line that I created. I think the more interesting is e4 at this point. This is actually the more interesting, and you do have to remember what to do. So let's see. I think that's a 1. So this is the next one is interesting. I believe this is actually really fun one. So e4 is, You have to be careful playing this. Black is trying to claim that he may take the center from you. And I was very careful about this one, creating it and make it as a live opening to play. You do play c4. I think the idea of d5, like you could play e3, the idea of d5, c6, actually black controlling the center fast enough, especially when you have knight e3 like this, it actually has to be good for black. So c4 is really countering, not allowing d5. So knight c6 is actually what I recommend that black continue with this. I think knight f6 is playable though. But I think the idea really comes down to d5. I mean, the reason I would like to play this as a d5 is to stopping black from playing d5 himself. And then we control the center. Knight f6 is interesting. This is actually engine-backed moves. E3, knight e6. So knight e6 is idea, knight c5. And this interesting setup by black. I mean, I don't think I've seen this happening in any database. So knight e2, the idea is you go to knight c3. So knight c5, you do have to be careful. There's a tactic here. So knight c3. This is really fun, right? You have knight e3, you have knight c3, you have a pawn at d5. I mean, a5 is also what engines like to do. Believe it or not, let's say play bishop here. There's also some weird d6 that I looked over here. a5 is interesting. There might be a case of b4 being played. And this is the reason why e5 is actually one of the moves that black, you know, he was able to play a5 to stop b4. So after here, bishop e2, this actually feels like it's equal to me. It's very playable. It's fun. Remember, knight c2. So instead of knight e1, knight d3 now, maybe knight c2, knight d4. And that's actually one of the ideas why I was playing d5 in the first place, is to allow the knight to go to d4. This is actually fun. I mean, I'm gonna try to hoping that, you know, by the next day that, you know, an opponent that would play this, just to see how. It's actually a good idea to play with humans as far as I'm concerned. Engines is very good to play openings with, like off the beat opening. But this one, I believe that this specific opening is really alive and playable. It's not the off the beat opening. I don't agree with that. I feel like this opening is really playable, to be honest. This may end the lines. I mean, if I'm missing a line, I could always tell you guys. I could always, you know, in the future content, I could always, you know, correct myself or, you know, share more lines. There's also opportunity of sharing more lines. Like, this is just the start, folks. So this actually, I believe this marks the stellars. We talked about, you know, we talked about d5, d4, e4. We talked about d5. So now there are more lines, more interesting lines coming ahead. Now, let me see. We talked about the stellar variation. We talked about the maneuver advanced variation. Let's see. We talked about the main lines. Let me see. Which one should I pick? I believe. All right. So we're going to walk into interesting lines now. 93. Hold on, I need to do this first. All right, I believe I have it. All right. So d4. This is still we're back to d5, by the way. For a brief minute here. I was actually playing Elder Ring, and there's a character called Mimic. So, I mean, I was just playing him, NPC. It's just a game, so I'm always saying Mimic for some reason. Anyways, here, folks. So, this break is interesting. This could happen, and this actually is interesting. What to do? Do you play c3, knight c2, e3? There's a fun way to play this, and I actually call this a symmetrical variation. There's a reason why. C4 is actually what I recommend you guys to play. This is actually fun. It's a fun way to play this. It actually feels like this is an easy way to play. So I recommend pawn takes. I think this is basically the only challenging way that black could play. And this leads to a really equal kind of structure. So takes e5, you take on d5. If you notice in this opening, I'm not allowing black to take the center. The moment you do allow to take the center, the more this opening becomes actually garbage. I was very keen about not letting black have any kind of momentum on the center. Believe it or not, here, folks, before here, there's a let me see, not this line. Okay, so never mind. Takes e4 is actually a good move, and according to the engine, knight f6, you do take. This is actually symmetrical. The line stop here, and this is easy. Also allowing bishop takes d3. It's. I'm gonna repeat this again. That bishop takes d3 is not the end of the world here. This is basically a line that I like to play. To allowing it. This actually feel like it's equal to me too. So there are more lines into this one. Maybe one more actually. Let me see. Yeah. Here, c4, knight f3, knight f6. This could actually happen. So I believe you do have to take on d5, knight takes d5, and knight takes d4. This feels like equal. And remember now, this actually this actually interesting for white. Now is knight c2 is something that we're able to achieve. So e5 is one way to play this, and I feel like this is not a big problem. Knight b5 is actually kind of interesting. There's actually a neat tactic is here, should your opponent not seeing it. There's knight c7. According to the engine, bishop b4 is a move, bishop d2, and I actually stopped here. I believe this is actually equal. You know, like I don't have a problem here. Even the engine's like this. There's also bishop e7 idea, which is strange, but it's still playable. I feel like this is interesting alone and it's fun to play. Again, I'm not giving the center. If you notice here, there's also in this line, I just wanted to check here. Bishop e3 may be a mistake. I'm just checking this queen. This possible. I wonder if this is the line here. No, knight b5. That feels okay. That feels correct. So this bishop d2 is simply equal as we just discussed. Maybe this is it. I'm just checking over all my collection here. I think this may end. We talked about e4. I'm just checking in. We talked about knight e3, d5 with all the lines, e5, d4, you take. This may potentially be, I'm just going to review it one more time in my collection just in case if I'm missing anything. I don't think I am, but we'll double check one more time. My collection. Yeah, it's symmetrical. We did this. I wanted to briefly show you guys. Actually, that's what I missed. I was talking about bishop takes c3. That's in case it's an interesting way to play. So here, yeah. So if bishop takes c3, you don't take here. There's also like queen e4. There's I believe is queen e4. So for example, if here is queen e4. And the idea is you take with the queen as as opposed to you take with the pawn. So bishop d7, he says queen takes c3. And I actually feel like this is actually good for white. I mean, according to the engine, it's actually plus 4.4. So this is actually good for white. This is something to remember that you don't take with the pawn. You do take with you check and take with the queen. Something to keep an eye on. This may be it, folks. This is maybe it. One more time just to check everything. And I call this a symmetrical variation. The maneuver symmetrical, and you could understand why it's symmetrical. You end up playing c5, c4. with the idea of it looks like symmetrical to me. One more thing. Let me see. This double checking. Yeah, we talked about the symmetrical. We talked about all lines. Yep. We talked about the advance. We talked about the advanced Fianchetto, Bishop G7 1. And we talked about the main lines. Oh, actually, we talked about the main lines, I believe. One more time, just to check because I would love to show you guys again this one. So idea about this whole thing comes down to this. One more time for people reviewing this opening. The idea about this opening, and I call this his main line, you do have to play like this, knight f3. If you play g3, bishop f4, bishop g5, c3, now this is no longer my variation. No longer the main line. Bishop f5. You have to keep an eye here if bishop f5, because maybe it's actually like a London system. So knight c6, knight b4 is actually maybe ideas. You could also play like e6. There are some weird way that black could play e6. You pretty much, continue with the plan, right? c3, knight c2, knight e1, knight d3. This is I'm just showing you guys one more time because this is a key move, c3. This is absolutely the key move. And now after e6, you do have to be careful about this one. And knight c2, h6. There might be some other lines like bishop d6, rook c8 even. They all lead to the same thing, bishop g2, bishop, here. And the idea is this. Without this opening wouldn't exist for me. And the idea of knight d3. I hope you guys enjoy this. This is maybe one of the good content that I provided up to this point. And the next couple days, maybe even tomorrow, I'm going to start promoting this opening. The fun part is actually playing this live with, you guys seeing how I do. I always recommend you guys play this as soon as you understand the ideas, which is easy, and you know the lines. Have a go at it. It's fun to play. It's checked with engines. It's never been played before. I do take the claim that this is something that I create. It started with Zirconium, but it's no longer Zirconium. This is the maneuver, folks. All right, folks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and we'll stay tuned for more maneuver in the next couple days. See you, folks. Take care. Have a nice day.